Spirit of God in the clear running water, blowing to greatness the trees on the hill. Blow, blow, blow till I feel the breath of the Spirit blowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Anne Kupcis. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
It's great to have you. You're a person who's experienced a lot of life and a lot of faith in God, and you're very devout, and you also go to the Marian Center for many years. Can you tell us more how you got such a strong faith?
Well, maybe I can't. I think faith is a gift. How can I say that I have a strong belief in God when somebody more intelligent, more experienced standing next to me might say they don't believe in God? So I have to arrive at a conclusion that faith is a gift. I have two sons, and one is, I suppose, recognised as intelligent as he came through university as the top student of a university, and he might not agree the same view I have of God. And I have another son who said, "Mum, you're wasting your time." And so I have to accept that they have a lesser gift, whether it's from the Holy Spirit or whether they are not cooperating with the prompts that God has given them. I don't know. So I leave it saying, I don't know.
Yes, and can you remember a time when you got deeper in your faith?
I don't think I'm I don't believe I'm a very good attendee at anything that's going on. And an example is this morning at Mass. We go to one church and I've picked up 4 people, making 5 in my car, to be told, no, there's no Mass because the cleric has COVID. I get to the next place, I've got to help elderly out of the car. I get into the church and I think, where am I? And I've forgotten to remember that a lady's coming to pick up the dog. I get home, excuse me, and I feel, have I concentrated on the deep connection I should have with God? And I think, no, I haven't. So I don't believe I've got deep faith. I just believe that I do what I can in a day, and I think that my days have been a bit like Facey would say, a fortunate life. I've had a wonderful formation from a family that prayed, who put their beliefs and their commitment to community and life as priorities. And I hope that that's what I would say. I'm not a person who gets around feeling I'm prayerful, I'm deeply faithful, I'm deeply connected to God. I just live life and try and equate that through that I might be giving glory to God. When I meet him, he might have a different view.
I think from talking to you, I think you're quite a practical person. You do practical things for people, like pick them up for Mass and bring them home. Maybe
I won't get favour for that either, because when I get home I think, hey Annie, you're a soft touch. I get really overcommitted, and I had a woman staying in the house last night because she wanted to go to a meeting and it's too late to go home. There's just so many variables that happen in the day.
Yes.
And I think that God's put those in my path.
Yeah.
He must say, you're noisy, you're loud, you interact well with people. I don't believe in my teaching life I was gifted with great knowledge, but even with the toughest and roughest of kids, they'd say, hey, Miss really cares about us.
Oh,
so I think that looking back over life, it's giving people a sense that they are children of God, that they're entitled to their dignity, even if you have a very different view from theirs. I also think the older you get, you hear people being critical of others, but why can't we look not at the negativities, but at the richness that these people have in their own gift from God.
No, that's
I like
wonderful.
people.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, it's a wonderful attitude to have, and I know that there are a lot of scientists who've done a lot of research, and they have found that the people who are successful in life are those who have an attitude of gratitude and are thankful 3 or 4 times a day.
Too true.
Yeah, so you
I
do
even
have
said that to 2 gardeners yesterday who arrived, and if I had have met these men in any other different circumstances, I would have said, in a pretty crude way and a snobbish way, they're not my type. One had face metal all over him and the other was quite different. And when I said to the younger fellow who had quite a bushy red beard, I said, wow, I said, I think you would outsmart Ned Kelly with your red beard. And just the joy that he had of looking back at you and the respect that he gave me the whole time he was there. If what he was doing pleased me, if he could do this to help, and I just thought anybody is entitled to being acknowledged and made much of for who they are.
No, that's great to have an attitude of gratitude. And you know, in my part, when I was younger, I had depression, and I used to go to a group called Grow, and it said in the book, one of the paragraphs, it says, think of what you have rather than what you haven't, and think of what is rather than what isn't. And that really helped me to focus, you know, not on the, you know, some people focus on the nothing. Nothing comes from nothing, but if you have something, you can work at it.
Too true.
Yeah.
I think there's a lovely quote of Charles Dickens like that. I wrote it on a card yesterday. I can't, if I had to speak on it, I would have brought it. But to be aware of all that life has given you. We've all had misfortunes and mishaps, but do not dwell on those, because the present is here now, and who you are and what you are is a total blessing. And
that's beautiful.
we can't worry about tomorrow, because it's said in the scriptures, today has enough worries of its own. We can't manipulate, manage or pressure tomorrow into our liking, so live the moment. God might take us, a bit like my dear husband.
Yes, I will. I want to know more about that. Thank you. After the break, we'll come back to talk about your husband and you. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break. Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Anne Kupcis. Welcome back, Anne.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Yes, Anne, you have talked about your faith in God, and also now I would like to know about you, the love of your life, and how faith has been part of that too.
Well, who would know who you marry or why they cross your path? And in thinking of what I might call a regular family of 4 brothers, hulking big, handsome Australian footballers and sports people, why this unusual gentleman should cross my path and form a long and happy marriage with him. Of all these people that were displaced at the end of the war, they came here, and Australians were so suspicious of them. They were something that they had never understood, and so they gave them terminologies of New Australians, or they gave them wogs, or I can't bring to light all the other names that they were. Nina Colotti wrote a very funny television program about how he saw Australians. So it was quite an amazing thing that this, what I called weird wonder, came into my life, and I would include him in functions, not thinking he had any particular bonding to me. And then hearing their tragedies and seeing the strengths that these people, with their culture and their total lack of support really in the early days of Australia, they were put in what were called Nissen huts out at Boangilla, east of Wodonga, boiling hot in the summer, freezingly cold in the winter. They had very few amenities, and as I heard from them later, their greatest joy was their freedom. And they were thankful for that. They didn't expect televisions and amenities, and from that, the stress of those people, that because the government had paid for their bondage here, they were placed anywhere in snowy mountains, and they had to work back that bond. And to see how they were separated and the mental stress it brought on members of the family, and the women particularly, they were carrying out duties of washing clothes in old tin tubs, not knowing where their men friends were. And that was the environment my husband grew up in. When I'd talk to him about etiquette of standing up when a woman came into the room, or language, and he would very quickly volley back to me, "You don't learn all these things if you're living in a room with a blanket separating you and that's your home." But through it all you saw an enormous strength of vitality, that they had to be resourceful. They had a culture of arts, music, games at night which were chess, and they utilised every minute of their day. The delicacy of their food, how you never put food straight on a plate, the respect and trust you had in family members, and their collegiate groups called Selenis, where they celebrated together, and I would have to have them in my home when I later formed a closer bond with Avis. The endeavours that they had of studies, of university life and so on, and yet we as Australians had no understanding of that. And I suppose I didn't have that understanding when I met with Avis, because I'd say, "You don't say I seen him, it's a contraction. I have seen him." He said, "I don't know what a contraction is." I said, "There's a verb and it's been shortened. I've seen him." And his language, because there was no assistance in the schools, there was no migrant education, he learned what I called vernacular English, and it was, everything was bloody, or it was a bugger, and it was all what you mightn't call in German Hochdeutsch. It wasn't high English, or it wasn't high anything. And even in his later life, when he got excited about something, it always reverted back to everything was bloody, or it was bullshit, or it was spin, and it really gave a true interpretation of how he saw life. So it was through that that I was involved in the education area of a program. It was called NEAT, National Education to Adult to Tertiary. And I met him at a cocktail party raising funds for medical equipment at Prince Henry, which has now been imploded and closed as a medical hospital. And I met him there, and I said to him about who he was or what he was, and then he asked me what I did, and I said, well, at the moment I'm involved with NEAT, a National Education to Adult to Tertiary. He said, "Oh, I'd be interested in that." And I said, "Well, you sure?" And I said, "I think we have 120 who would hope to get that pathway but to university." He said, "Oh, I've been to university, but I couldn't cope with it." And it was in the time where you had to pay your own fees. He parked cars all night to get money. He couldn't ask for any money from his parents, they didn't have any. And he was probably half asleep through the lectures because, and he had no formal training in English. He could speak English, but he could not write it. But his English, as I say, was punctuated with vernacular English. So he was admitted to Melbourne University, and then of course he had to work again in the holidays, where he went to Mareeba to tie tobacco, or he cane cut.
Yeah.
So it was a hard way back to education, and that was my meeting with him and assisting him.
Wow, and that's how you grew to know him, and you, obviously your faith in God and faith in him through teaching him. Yeah, so we may go for a break, and after the break we'll hear more about it. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break.
Blow till I feel the breath of the Spirit blowing in me. Blow, blow, blow till I feel the breath of the Spirit blowing in me.
Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Anne Kupcis. Hello, Anne.
Hello, Geraldine.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
You told the story, or the true story, about your husband, how you met him, and you were saying, and you decided to teach him.
Well, I didn't decide to teach him, but he then, after a bit of perseverance in ringing La Trobe University, Professor Braybrook gave him a place there, and he started formal studies there, which weren't easy for him, but because he couldn't cope well with English, he chose things that he was really very smart with, was mathematics and figures, and so doing accountancy and finance were then his areas, which you don't have to write big essays on. And why then did he become a permanent fixture in my life? He would, if I was doing something with students, because I had a student hall that I was managing in Brighton, he'd say, could he play tennis? Could he do this? Could he do various things? I'd say, you can do what you like. There's a lot of lovely young girls here. Come over. But then it became more that he one time said to me, I wouldn't be doing this if you were not interested. And I thought that a bit dangerous. And from there he did graduate, and then at another time he said how he had been for 4 years taking correspondence from, I don't know, it might have been Franciscans, I don't know, a Catholic source of correspondence for faith formation. I said, what the heck are you doing that for? He said, because I'd like to become a Catholic. And I said, is that real? And he said, well, his family background was Lutheran. And I said, where had this intention? He said that in working in mines, that someone was squashed, and he saw the bravery of them dying with them holding a miraculous medal.
Oh, wow.
And how then he went to Montreal to tell the family how their son, or I don't get the story quite right, but when he got to Montreal, the son had died. And he just had this perception that there was a bravery and there was a courage in facing death, that it had impacted on him. But then I thought he would go to evening lectures at St. Francis's, where there were instruction in the faith. And then one time he said to me, oh look, I think I'll never get over the line.
Yeah.
And I then said to my brother, who had a friend who was a casual sort of disposition and a laughable sort of man, a priest, and he thought he would be a suitable person to tease out from him, was it fact or fiction? And he went to him, and the priest said, oh, you only want to do this to impress Anne. And he said, no, I have been hoping that I would become a Catholic for nearly 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And how he'd travelled extensively, and he'd seen the world, and he'd seen lots of other issues. Anyhow, he was received into the church with a group of people who laid their hand on him and imparting some of their spirituality on him. Then, with him finishing his formal studies, we married in 1976.
Oh, wow.
And he then had various jobs in finance and the stockbroking and whatever. But the diversity of his personality was just staggering.
Yes.
There was nothing that he wouldn't want to do, be it skiing, be it walk. Numerous caminos, the St. Jacques to Vaisale to the Pyrenees, Santiago, Kokoda, anything that you would know. He would have 7 pairs of hiking boots.
Wow.
And off he would go. But a spirit that was indomitable. He was an inimitable sort of fellow. Nobody could copy the ways that he had, and he'd had to work those out himself. So you would look at him and say, this inspiration has come from something very deep. It's not a veneer. It's not an artificiality to fit in with the successful, or to be somebody that is acknowledged by, oh, don't you look a handsome young fellow with smart clothes on. By the end, he was nothing other than shabby, and I'd say, people will think you're a tramp, and he would say, I don't really care what people think. I think for myself.
Yes.
And that was true within politics. He saw the drift in our losing our freedoms. He was very conscious of spin and what he would call, when someone was talking on television, as bullshit. And then his last day of sitting watching, because we were in lockdown, he watched the Mass from the cathedral, Archbishop Comensoli, and because we always had a commitment on a Sunday night of dispersing the bread that was left over from bread shops, we could never have a formal meal Sunday night, so we would have a formal meal Sunday. And when I was doing the dishes, I consciously looked over and thought, oh, God's good to you. You've had a lovely dinner. You're sitting there on the couch patting your dog, and life is good for you. God is good to you. And I think that was my last thought. He went off walking and had a heart attack.
Oh, that's sad. And thank you for sharing the story. And I'd like you to come back for next week's program. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Tune in next week. Goodbye and God bless you.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit.